The executive board's applause still echoed when Dale Everett's voice cut through the room, high-pitched and demanding, "Brenda May, where did you put my car keys? I told you I needed them." Every eye in the crowded ballroom snapped to me, my newly awarded promotion certificate clutched like a flimsy shield. My face burned. Dale merely shrugged, a careless smirk on his lips. "What's the big deal? Can't a guy find his keys?" Brenda May stood on the edge of the ballroom, the buzz of her promotion party fading into a low hum around her. Her new title, etched onto the certificate she still held, felt odder than it should have, almost insignificant. A damp patch on the crisp paper where Dale had fumbled with a glass of champagne earlier served as a physical reminder of the evening's start. She caught the eye of Mr. Henderson, a senior partner, who quickly averted his gaze, a slight frown creasing his forehead. It was the same look she had seen on other faces throughout the room since Dale's outburst. Her cheeks still felt warm, the lingering flush of humiliation. She had worked for this. Years of late nights, skipped lunches, and calculated decisions had led to this moment. Vice President of Operations, a formidable title for a woman of 31. It was supposed to be a confirmation, a solid capstone on her carefully constructed existence. Instead, she felt a widening crack, a fault line running right through the center of her life. Her mind replayed the morning, a loop of small indignities. She had been pulling on her pantyhose, the silk cool against her skin, when Dale's voice, thick with sleep, had drifted from the bedroom. "Brenda May, where are my brown loafers, the ones for your party tonight?" She had paused, her fingers fumbling with the waistband. "Where are they always, Dale, in the shoe rack?" She had called back, her voice sharper than she intended. She found them, of course, exactly where they belonged. He just never looked. That was Dale, 27 years old, a capable man in theory, but entirely dependent on her for the small, everyday mechanics of his life. Their marriage on paper was ideal. Two successful young people building a life in the suburbs of St. Louis, a quiet testament to Midwestern aspiration. Beneath the surface, though, a slow rot had taken hold, hidden from everyone but her. She forced herself to smile, to nod at a passing colleague. She needed to push the marital issues aside, to focus on the triumph. This was her night, her success. Then, across the crowded room, she saw him. Mark Jensen. He was leaning against a pillar, a half-empty glass of amber liquid in his hand, looking much the same as he had 10 years ago, only with a little more gravitas around the eyes. Her ex-boyfriend, from back when they were just kids with big plans and bigger dreams. He had always said, "Always destined for great things, Brenda May." His eyes found hers, and for a split second, the noise of the party receded. A familiar jolt, like static electricity, passed between them, unexpected and potent. Mark pushed off the pillar, navigating through clusters of laughing people. He stopped in front of her, his smile gentle. "Brenda May, it's been a while. Congratulations on the promotion. I heard about it through the grapevine." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "You seem different. Everything okay?" The question hung in the air, pulling at the thread of her composure. She gripped the certificate tighter. "It has been," she managed, her voice a little thin. "And thanks. It's a lot." The facade felt heavy, like a mask she was tired of wearing. "I thought I had it all figured out, Mark, but lately—" She trailed off, the admission hanging unspoken. Mark looked around, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "It's warm in here. Why don't we get some air? Just for a minute." Brenda May hesitated. Her eyes scanned the room, finding Dale by the bar, animatedly telling a story to two junior accountants. He was laughing, completely oblivious. A sharp pang of something she couldn't quite name, resentment maybe, or simple exhaustion, twisted in her gut. She took a breath. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She followed Mark through a side door, the cool night air hitting her face like a splash of water. The parking lot was mostly empty, the city lights a distant glow against the dark sky. She felt a strange mix of excitement and liberation, like she could breathe fully for the first time all evening. She felt alive, a sensation that had been dormant for too long. Mark opened the passenger door of his dark sedan. "Hop in, just for a moment." She slid onto the leather seat, the interior smelling faintly of cedar and something clean. He started the engine, the low thrum, a comfort. He didn't drive, just let it idle. So, he said, turning to her, his profile outlined by the faint dashboard lights. What's really going on, Brenda May? The dam broke. It's Dale, she admitted, the name a sigh. He's like a child. I feel more like his mother than his wife. Brenda May let out a short, bitter laugh, the sound dry in her throat. He can't even find his own shoes, Mark. That's not an exaggeration. Before tonight, he called me from the bedroom, panicked, because he couldn't locate his loafers. They were right where they always are, in the rack by the door. She shook her head, the quiet confession making her shoulders slump. It's like living with a project, not a partner. Everything needs my supervision, my direction. I feel like I'm constantly picking up after him, physically and emotionally. Mark listened, his gaze steady, understanding in his eyes. He didn't interrupt, just let her words hang in the still air of the car. I remember what it was like with someone who always knew exactly what she wanted, he said finally, his voice low. You had a plan for everything, Brenda May. Knew where you were headed, what you'd do to get there. Even back then, you had that fire. Their eyes met, the unspoken history between them a palpable weight in the small space. She remembered that fire. It felt like a distant ember now, buried under layers of routine and obligation. She felt a pull toward him, an undeniable magnetic force. She leaned in, just a fraction, but it was enough. I've made such a mess of things, she whispered, the words barely audible, a raw admission that stung her own ears. The crisp promotion certificate, forgotten on her lap, felt like a cruel joke. Mark's hand rose, tentative at first, then settled gently on her hair, his fingers brushing against her temple. A jolt, like a current running through her, sparked a forgotten warmth. It was a simple touch, yet it resonated deep within her, awakening something dormant. We all make mistakes, Brenda May, he said, his voice soft, almost a caress. Question is, what are you going to do about it? His words, a challenge wrapped in gentleness, were exactly what she needed. Without conscious thought, Brenda May leaned in fully, closing the small distance between them. Her lips found his, hesitant at first, then fierce, desperate. It was a powerful reconnection, a decade of unspoken words and pent-up emotions finally finding release. The kiss was long, deep, and intoxicating, a rediscovery of a feeling she had convinced herself she'd outgrown, or perhaps simply invented. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the silence of the car felt deafening. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum. Exhilaration warred with a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. We shouldn't have done that, she murmured, her voice husky, her eyes unable to meet his. Mark reached out, cupping her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. I never stopped loving you, Brenda May, he said, his confession stark and direct. And I have to ask, are you really happy with Dale? The question hung there, a fragile thread she knew she had to snap. No, she admitted, the word a small, painful exhale. I'm not. I feel stifled, like I'm playing a role instead of living. Every day, it's a performance. The perfect wife, the capable woman who handles everything. But it's not me. Not anymore. Then why stay? Mark pressed, his gaze unwavering, challenging her to confront the truth she had so carefully buried. The question was simple, but the answer was tangled in years of expectation, fear, and the sheer difficulty of admitting a colossal mistake. How do you tell someone, let alone yourself, that the entire foundation of your adult life was built on a flawed premise? The thought of tearing it all down, of standing exposed, terrified her. He saw the struggle in her eyes. He pulled her closer, wrapping her in a comforting hug, his arms strong and steady around her. It makes you human, Brenda May, he whispered into her hair. Making a mistake. The real mistake, the one you can't come back from, is staying unhappy because you're too afraid to change it. His words settled over her, a quiet balm. She pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes again. What if I left Dale? She asked, the question fragile, tentative, a test of a possibility she hadn't dared to voice until now. What then? Mark didn't answer with words. He answered with another kiss, deeper and more passionate than the last, a promise wrapped in unspoken desires. lost in the moment in the intoxicating resurgence of old feelings and new possibilities. They didn't hear the crunch of footsteps approaching the car. They didn't notice the sudden halt of movement outside the driver's side door until it was violently yanked open. Dale stood there, illuminated by the faint glow of the party lights, his face a mask of utter shock and raw, devastating betrayal. His eyes, usually clouded with mild confusion, were wide, accusing. "Brenda May," he whispered, his voice barely a breath, broken. "What are you doing?" The sudden cold night air hitting my face was nothing compared to the shock that seized me. Dale's voice, a choked whisper, felt like a physical blow. Reality crashed down, heavy and suffocating. I scrambled from the passenger seat, my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat a frantic warning. "Dale, I can explain," I stammered, my voice thin and reedy, a sound I barely recognized. His initial shock, frozen on his face just moments before mom, dissolved, twisting into instant, blazing rage. His eyes, usually so guileless, were now dark with accusation. "Explain! I think I can see pretty clearly what's going on." His voice rose, sharp and dangerous. I glanced around. The soft glow from the ballroom windows outlined several figures now standing by the glass, drawn by the commotion. My colleagues, Mr. Henderson, Miss Davies from accounting. Their faces were indistinct, but their presence was undeniable. "Dale, please," I pleaded, lowering my voice. "Let's not do this here. Not in front of everyone." But he wasn't listening. He pushed past me, his anger now squarely aimed at Mark. He grabbed Mark's shirt collar, pulling him halfway out of the car. "Who the hell do you think you are, making out with my wife?" Mark, still somewhat disoriented, tried to push Dale's hands away. "Look, man, I'm sorry. This isn't how we wanted you to find out." His voice was strained, attempting to be conciliatory. Dale laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that scraped against my ears. "Find out what? That my wife is a cheating—" He spat a vulgar slur, the word hitting me like a physical slap across the face. "Dale, that's enough," I cried, stepping forward, a searing shame washing over me. I felt the collective gasp from the growing crowd. More people had spilled out onto the patio, their party chatter now replaced by stunned silence. Dale turned from Mark, his eyes sweeping over the faces, a manic energy about him. His voice cut through the quiet night, loud and deliberately amplified. "Ladies and gentlemen, nothing like finding your wife in another man's arms to liven up the evening." He spread his hands in a mocking gesture, as if presenting a grand spectacle. My face burned. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. My carefully constructed professional image, my authority, my success, it was all crumbling, dissolving into dust right before their eyes. "Dale, please," I whispered, pulling on his arm. "Let's just go home. Please." He shrugged off my hand, his lip curling. "Funny, Brenda May, you seemed pretty content with nonverbal communication a few minutes ago. Now you want to talk?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm. Mark, having extricated himself from the car, stepped forward, his fists clenched but his tone calm. "Look, let's just all take a breath here. There's no need for this." Dale didn't hesitate. He swung a wild, unpracticed punch that landed squarely on Mark's jaw. Mark reeled back, stumbling against the car door, a hand instinctively going to his mouth. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a sudden burst of panicked chatter. Someone screamed. Dale ignored Mark, his attention fixed solely on me, his eyes blazing. "And you," he roared, jabbing a finger at my chest. "All those times my friends said you were too old for me, too smart, too ambitious, that you'd eventually leave me behind. And I defended you. I told them you loved me. I told them you weren't like that." His voice cracked, raw with emotion. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down my face. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer public wreckage of everything I thought I was overwhelmed me. "Dale, I'm so sorry," I choked out, the words catching in my throat. "I never meant for this to happen." "Never meant for what?" he shouted back, his voice hoarse, echoing across the parking lot. "Never meant to marry me? Never meant to cheat on me? Or never meant to get caught?" The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. I saw the glint of phone screens reflecting the distant lights, capturing this devastating, humiliating moment. My professional reputation, the one I had built with such meticulous care, was being shattered, piece by piece, right here, right now. Dale took a step closer, his voice dropping, but still cutting through the air like a knife. The anger in his eyes was now mingled with a deep, wounded pain. I always felt like I wasn't good enough for you, Brenda May, he confessed, his own insecurity laid bare for everyone to see. But I tried. God, I tried. But now I see the truth. You're worse. You're a liar and a cheat. Each word was a deliberate, agonizing cut. The party dispersed in a blur of hushed conversations and hurried goodbyes. My promotion celebration, the culmination of years of quiet effort, was irrevocably ruined. Colleagues, their faces a mix of embarrassment and thinly veiled judgment, averted their eyes as they made their way to their cars. Dale had vanished, speeding off in his car before I could even process his accusations. I was left standing in the near-empty parking lot, the chilly night air a stark contrast to the burning shame in my gut. Mark was there, his jaw already bruising, trying to comfort me, his hand gentle on my arm. But his presence, which had been a brief sanctuary, now felt like another open wound. I pulled away, shaking my head. I couldn't look at him, couldn't accept his touch. Not now, not with the eyes of my boss, Mr. Henderson, watching from the doorway, his usual pleasant demeanor replaced by a look of profound disgust and pity. Ms. Davies, a woman I had mentored, whispered something to another colleague, her gaze cold and critical. Their respect, I knew, was gone. I drove home, the silence in my car deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine. The city lights blurred past, each one a sharp, accusing eye. The exhilaration I'd felt in Mark's car, that brief, intoxicating sense of liberation, had curdled into a heavy dread. The reality of my actions, stark and undeniable, was sinking in. It felt like swallowing glass. The house was dark when I arrived. Empty. Dale was gone. A single piece of paper sat on the kitchen counter, illuminated by the faint glow of the street lamp outside the window. His handwriting was messy, rushed. Don't bother. No explanation, no further words, just that short, dismissive phrase. The finality of it chilled me more than any raging argument ever could have. The next morning, the office was a minefield. The quiet hum of productivity was replaced by a low thrum of whispers that stopped abruptly whenever I walked past. Heads bent together, then snapped apart, eyes quickly darting away. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. I was isolated, and pariah in the very place I had worked so hard to ascend. My morning coffee tasted like ash. An email from HR landed in my inbox just before lunch. Brenda May, we need to speak. The meeting was formal, held in a sterile conference room. Ms. Davies, ironically, sat beside Mr. Henderson. My fears were confirmed. My newly acquired position, the one celebrated less than 24 hours earlier, was now under review. They spoke of company values, professional conduct, and maintaining a respectful work environment. Their words were calm, measured, but the message was clear. I called my sister, Carol, later that day, hoping for some shred of support, a kind voice in the wasteland of my life. Carol, always the practical one, offered no comfort. Her voice, usually warm, was laced with disappointment and judgment. What were you thinking, Brenda May? She asked, her tone flat. After all you built, all that hard work, what about Dale? He's a good man, if a little naive. There was no sympathy, just a reminder of my failure. Mark called, his voice earnest. Brenda May, I need to talk to you. I'm here for you. We can figure this out. But his optimism felt jarring, out of place. I was too overwhelmed, too numb to respond positively. I just wanted to be left alone with the wreckage. In a desperate search for solace, I drove to my parents' house in the quiet suburbs of Kirkwood. I found them deeply embarrassed, their usual stoic demeanor replaced by fretful concern over appearances. What will the neighbors say? My mother fretted, wringing her hands. My father, typically quiet, just shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. Their standing in the community, the perception of their respectable daughter, was paramount. My pain was secondary. A few days later, a cold official letter arrived via certified mail. Dale had filed for divorce. The legal jargon blurred before my eyes, but the message was clear. Everything was over. That's when it truly hit me. The extent of my isolation. Professionally, I was a liability. Personally, I had alienated everyone who was supposed to be my anchor. The only person still reaching out was Mark. I started seeing him more, drawn to his unwavering presence, finding a temporary fragile comfort in his belief in us. He talked eagerly about a future, about moving in together, about new beginnings. But his eager plans felt premature, like trying to build a house on quicksand. The weight of my choices, a constant dull ache, began to crush me. The initial exhilaration that had prompted the kiss in Mark's car, that fleeting taste of freedom, had been replaced by a heavy, pervasive dread that settled deep in my bones. The divorce proceedings began with a swift, brutal efficiency. Dale's initial shock had curdled into a bitter vindictiveness, meticulously channeled through his lawyer, a sharp-suited woman who seemed to relish turning my life into a public spectacle. In every mediation session, every legal document, I was painted as a calculating, unfaithful wife, a predator who had exploited Dale's innocent good nature. The narrative was simple, clean, and devastatingly effective. My own lawyer, a weary man named Mr. Thompson, advised caution. "Brenda May," he'd said, his voice flat, "the optics here are not good. The affair was public. Your husband was humiliated publicly. We need to be realistic." He spoke of damage control, of mitigating losses, of accepting the inevitable. Dale wasn't just seeking a fair settlement. He was seeking vengeance. He demanded a significant share of my assets, far beyond anything typical for a 4-year marriage, including a percentage of my recent promotion bonus, arguing that my professional rise had been a direct result of his sacrifices and support. His campaign of character assassination didn't stop in the courtroom. More details, embellished and twisted, began to surface on local gossip blogs and community forums. Anonymously, of course, but the source was clear. My name became synonymous with scandal in our small Midwestern town. Life outside my front door became a gauntlet. In the grocery store, I saw mothers pull their children closer, their eyes flicking to me with a mixture of pity and condemnation. At the coffee shop, conversations would abruptly halt, only to resume in hushed whispers as soon as I passed. People I had known for years would visibly cross the street to avoid me, pretending to be engrossed in their phones or a storefront display. I soon discovered Dale wasn't just a passive source of information. He was actively turning our mutual friends against me. He'd call them, his voice heavy with feigned sorrow, recounting his version of events, twisting my actions into a narrative of cold, calculated betrayal. Brunch invitations stopped. Text messages went unanswered. My social circle, once robust, had evaporated. Mark tried to stand by me. He'd come over, bringing takeout, listening to my tearful recounting of the day's humiliations. But even his patience, once limitless, began to wear thin under the relentless pressure of Dale's campaign. "It's a lot, Brenda May, he admitted one evening, running a hand through his hair. "I mean, this just keeps escalating." His unwavering support, which had seemed like a beacon, now flickered, threatening to dim. I started to question if he could truly withstand this constant siege. Then the final blow came from work. A formal letter, concise and without preamble, landed on my desk. My position had been terminated. The company cited damage to corporate image and loss of trust. The promotion, the career I had so painstakingly built, was gone. I hit rock bottom then, a quiet, desolate place where the air felt thin and cold. I was utterly alone, stripped of my marriage, my friends, my reputation, and my livelihood. The future, once a brightly lit path, was now a vast, empty void. I contemplated leaving town, packing a bag and driving until the landscape changed and no one knew my name. But a stubborn pride, a lingering sense of responsibility for my own mess, held me back. I wouldn't run. A few days later, a particularly nasty article appeared in the local paper, the St. Louis Courier. It was tucked away on page 3, beneath a story about a zoning dispute. But the headline screamed, "Promoted exec's scandalous affair shatters marriage. Rock's community. It detailed the party, Dale's outburst, even Mark's punch. It was a humiliating public autopsy of my life. The story was a stark reminder of how quickly everything can unravel when the truth, or at least one version of it, comes to light. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The constant public scrutiny, the legal letters arriving daily, the quiet humiliation of grocery store encounters. It all began to wear on Mark. I saw it first in his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Then it crept into his words and finally into his actions. He started making excuses, urgent deadlines at work, a sick relative in Kansas City, a sudden pressing need to reorganize his garage. The elaborate explanations grew more frequent, their transparency more obvious. I noticed the growing distance, the subtle shift in his affection. His hand, once quick to reach for mine, now often remained in his lap. His gaze, once so intense, sometimes drifted past me, lost in some private calculation. The easy laughter we once shared had faded, replaced by strained silence. One evening after he'd canceled plans for the third time that week, I drove to his apartment. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. He opened the door, a flicker of surprise, then something else, unreadable, crossing his face. I stepped inside, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "Are you still in this, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, tight with a desperate need for reassurance. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes. He walked to the window, staring out at the dimly lit street. "Brenda May," he said, his voice low. "This is a lot. I never signed up for all this. The divorce, the articles, the calls from your ex's lawyer. It's a level of drama I just wasn't prepared for." He turned to face me, his expression grim. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this, for all of this." The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. He suggested we take a break, a euphemism I immediately understood. It was over. He was leaving. Mark, the catalyst for my brief, intoxicating moment of liberation, the one who had promised a future, was abandoning me. An agonizing wave of betrayal washed over me, a pain sharper, more profound than anything I had felt from Dale. Dale's betrayal had been one of shattered illusions, of public humiliation. Mark's was from the one I had chosen, the one I had risked everything for. It was a wound that went straight to the heart of my choices, confirming my deepest fear. I had traded one dependency for another, and now I was utterly alone. I withdrew completely then, pulling the curtains against the outside world. I stopped answering calls, ignored text messages. My home became my prison, a silent, solitary space. I spent days in a kind of waking stupor, rereading old letters from high school, from college, from a time when life felt simpler, when my choices hadn't carried such devastating consequences. I clung to those faded memories, trying to find a trace of the girl I used to be, the one who had known what she wanted. My mental health deteriorated. Showering felt like an insurmountable task. Eating became a chore, an obligation I often ignored. Guilt gnawed at me, a constant dull ache in my stomach, punctuated by sharp stabs of regret. Every mistake, every misstep, every harsh word I had ever uttered to Dale replayed in my mind on an endless loop. A call from Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, brought me back to the present with a jolt. Dale's final settlement offer. It was harsh, demanding. After legal fees, after the division of assets, I would be left financially destitute. There was no recourse, no fight left in me. I signed the papers, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. Later that evening, rummaging through a box of old photos, I found one of Dale and me. We were at the county fair, early in our marriage, before the cracks had begun to show. He had an arm around me, his smile witty and genuine. My head was tilted against his shoulder, my eyes bright with a happiness I barely remembered. I looked at the picture, then at my reflection in the darkened window, a pale, drawn woman with tired eyes and shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. I wept then, for the life I had so carelessly destroyed, for the simple, uncomplicated joy that now felt utterly beyond my reach. Rock bottom hit again, not with a sudden crash, but with a dull, persistent thud. This time, though, something shifted. The blame, which had previously been a shield I wielded against Dale's immaturity, or Mark's eventual cowardice, began to crumble. Slowly, painfully, I started to see my own reflection in the wreckage, my choices, my consequences. I was on one of my increasingly frequent, solitary walks around the neighborhood, my head down, when I nearly bumped into Sarah Miller, an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, probably because I'd always considered her a bit too small town for my ambitious trajectory. She stopped, her eyes, surprisingly kind, meeting mine. "Brenda May," she said softly, "it ain't easy, is it?" There was no judgment in her voice, only a quiet understanding. It was the first truly gentle word spoken to me in months. I just nodded, unable to speak. "Sometimes," Sarah continued, her gaze lingering, "it helps to talk to someone. Not a friend, someone who just listens." She gave a subtle nod, a hint towards professional help, then offered a small, knowing smile and walked away, leaving me with a small, unexpected seed of thought. I continued my walks, now with a different kind of observation. I looked at the neatly kept lawns, the kids playing in sprinklers, the old men rocking on their porches. The small-town life I had once scorned, so eager to escape its perceived limitations, now appeared almost tranquil, devoid of the complex betrayals I had woven into my own. I reflected on my ambition, that relentless drive that had propelled me forward, up the corporate ladder. It had been my defining characteristic, my identity. But it had also overshadowed everything else, particularly my personal life. My marriage, in retrospect, had been a casualty of that ambition, seen not as a partnership, but as another box to check, another marker of success. A memory surfaced, sharp and stinging. Dale, several months before the promotion party, sitting on the edge of the bed, his head down. "I just want you to be proud of me, Brenda May," he had said, his voice quiet, almost pleading. I had been preoccupied with a presentation, dismissing his vulnerability with a wave of my hand, telling him he was being silly. That, of course, I was proud. But now the memory stung with a fresh, raw pain. His words had been a cry, not for validation, but for connection, for recognition beyond his perceived inadequacy. I began to understand. Dale's earlier helplessness, his dependence, it wasn't just immaturity. It was perhaps a desperate attempt to stay connected, to be needed by the woman who was always so capable, so self-sufficient. I had mistaken his need for weakness, my own strength for superiority. The next time Mr. Thompson called, presenting the final unyielding terms of the divorce settlement, I didn't fight, I didn't argue, I simply accepted. The house, the remaining paltry savings, it was all gone. My fate was sealed. The money didn't matter anymore. The losses were deeper. I started clearing out the house, meticulously sorting through years of accumulated belongings. Each item, a piece of a life that was no longer mine, was packed into boxes or donated. I was readying myself to move, embracing the idea of a fresh start. However painful and uncertain it might be, it was a cleansing, a physical manifestation of the internal changes that were slowly, subtly taking root. One rainy afternoon, I sat at the empty kitchen table, a blank piece of paper before me. I wrote a letter to Dale, unsent, just for myself. I expressed genuine sorrow for my actions, not just for getting caught, not for the consequences, but for the hurt I had inflicted, for my blindness to his needs, for the way I had diminished him. The words flowed, raw and honest, a confession of guilt, a recognition of my own failings. I was beginning to understand that paying the price wasn't just about losing things. My job, my home, my husband, my reputation. It was about something far more profound. It was about internal growth, about facing the ugly truths within myself, and about transforming into someone capable of acknowledging the mess and perhaps, eventually, rebuilding. The house sold, eventually. The market was slow and I had to take a significant financial hit, but I needed out. The hollow rooms echoed with ghosts of a life that was no longer mine. With the proceeds, a fraction of what it once was worth, I secured a small two-bedroom apartment in a neighboring town, Kirkwood. It was close enough to St. Louis to feel connected, but far enough that I hoped for anonymity. The anonymity was a double-edged sword. It offered relief from the constant stares and whispers, a chance to breathe without judgment. But it also brought a new kind of loneliness, a quiet, unfamiliar solitude. No old friends to call, no familiar faces in the grocery store, just me in a space that felt temporary, like a way station. I started looking for work. My resume, once a source of pride, now felt like a scarlet letter. My past, it seemed, had a longer reach than I anticipated. Even in Kirkwood, my reputation preceded me. The polite rejections, the hesitant glances from HR managers, confirmed it. After weeks of fruitless searching, I took a job at a small accounting firm, processing invoices. It was low-paying, entry-level work, a stark and humbling contrast to the executive position I once held. Each day was a quiet grind, a reminder of how far I had fallen. Months passed. The seasons changed. One Tuesday afternoon, I was at a local diner nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee when I saw him. Dale. He was sitting in a booth by the window, laughing, his head tilted back. Across from him sat a woman, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She was pretty, with bright, open features. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen him since that night in the parking lot. Our eyes met across the checkered floor. His laughter died. The initial shock on his face gave way to a familiar wariness. But something else flickered there too, something I couldn't quite decipher. The woman looked at me, then at Dale, a question in her eyes. Dale said something to her, then slowly, deliberately, stood up and walked towards my table. The encounter was awkward, stiff, but civil. "Brenda May," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Fancy seeing you here." "Dale," I replied, my voice a little unsteady. "You too." We stood there for a moment, two strangers connected by a devastating past, a silent acknowledgement of our separate lives. He still looked wary, guarded, but I noticed a calmness about him I hadn't seen during our marriage, a quiet contentment that seemed to emanate from him. It wasn't the boisterous, often insecure confidence he tried to project. This was different, rooted deeper. A pang of genuine regret, sharp and unexpected, shot through me. He looked happy, truly happy, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had robbed him of that for too long. I reflected on my perfect life illusion, that carefully constructed edifice of success and status. I had chased external validation with a fervor that blinded me to the real treasures right in front of me. The true cost, I realized, wasn't just losing things, but losing myself in the process. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping with after-school programs for kids. There was no prestige, no corporate ladder to climb, just the simple, immediate satisfaction of helping others, of seeing a child's eyes light up with understanding. It was a different kind of purpose, one that didn't demand accolades but offered a quiet sense of belonging. One evening I wrote a letter to my parents, not to apologize, not to ask for forgiveness, but to explain, to articulate the journey I was on, the lessons learned, the person I was becoming. I didn't expect a reply. It was for me a closing of a chapter, a gesture of self-acceptance. Small moments of peace began to surface, a quiet sunset from my apartment window, the laughter of children at the community center, the crisp taste of morning coffee. I was learning that rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past, but about integrating it. The scars remained etched into my memory, but I was learning to live with them, to understand them, moving forward one slow, deliberate step at a time. I continued to work my modest job at the accounting firm. The tasks were repetitive, the pay meager, but there was an unexpected satisfaction in its simplicity. No more high-stakes decisions, no more boardroom politics, just columns of numbers and the quiet hum of a computer. It grounded me, forcing me to focus on the small, tangible details of the present. Slowly, I began to form new friendships, not with the polished, ambitious women of my former corporate world, but with the quiet, resilient women from the community center or the quirky colleagues at the accounting firm. Our bonds were built on shared experiences of everyday struggles, of making ends meet, of raising families, not on professional status or networking advantages. These friendships felt more genuine, more substantial than anything I had cultivated before. Then a surprising letter arrived from Carol, Her handwriting, usually so neat, was a little shaky. "It's been a hard road for us all, Brenda May," she wrote. There was no apology for her previous judgment, but an implicit understanding that time and distance had softened the edges of her anger. She suggested a quiet lunch. "When you're ready." It was a tentative olive branch, and I felt a flicker of warmth, a quiet hope that family ties might not be completely severed. I wrote back, accepting, a simple step towards healing. I still thought about Mark sometimes. Memories of his touch, the intensity of our stolen moments, would surface unexpectedly. But they no longer stung with the same raw intensity. The initial fire had cooled, leaving behind a faint warmth, like embers from a long extinguished flame. I acknowledged their shared moment, understanding its role as a catalyst, but also its transient nature. He had been a spark, but the fire, the destruction, and the rebuilding had been all mine. I reflected on the concept of morality. It wasn't an abstract set of rules preached from a pulpit, but the lived consequences of my actions. The pain I had caused Dale, the humiliation he endured, the erosion of my own standing. These were the tangible manifestations of my choices. Morality, I realized, was intimately woven into the fabric of everyday life, not separate from it. Paying the price wasn't a single cataclysmic event, I understood now. It was a continuous process of rebuilding, of living authentically, of accepting accountability for every choice, every misstep. It was in the quiet dignity of my modest job, in the genuine laughter with new friends, in the slow, painstaking effort to mend broken family bonds. I saved up enough money, dollar by painful dollar, from my small paycheck. Enough to take a small trip. Nothing grand, just a weekend drive through the Ozark foothills, something I never made time for when I was chasing promotions and prestige. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the rolling landscape. The quiet beauty of it all, the enduring presence of the land, settled something deep within me. I understood then that I might never fully regain what I had lost. The perfect house, the high-flying career, the illusion of a flawless life. But I had gained something more profound. Self-awareness, resilience, a quiet strength born from humility. I no longer sought grand success, the kind that demanded external validation and came at the cost of personal truth. Instead, I sought genuine happiness, built on honesty, humility, and the simple, everyday act of living authentically. The story of Brenda May didn't end with a happily ever after, not in the way stories often do, but it ended with a quiet hope, a sense of having weathered the storm and learned its harsh, indelible lessons. I stood there, looking out at the horizon, ready for whatever the next sunrise might bring. One slow, deliberate breath at a time. The wreckage was total. My promotion party, my career, my marriage, all of it lay in fragments around me. The silence in the house, after Dale had left, was a heavy thing, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I eventually found the note. "Don't bother." No anger, just a finality that spoke volumes. The office became a minefield of averted gazes. My position was under review. Then it was gone. My sister Carol offered no comfort, only judgment. My parents worried about the neighbors. Mark, the supposed catalyst for my freedom, eventually retreated, not ready for all this drama. I hit bottom alone, without a husband, without a friend. It was in that desolate space that I finally stopped blaming others. I saw my own choices, my own dismissals, my own yearning for something more that had led me to dismantle a perfectly adequate life. Dale, in his vulnerability, had just wanted me to be proud. I had mistaken his need for weakness, my ambition for superiority. The small apartment in Kirkwood, the low-paying job, the slow, painful process of rebuilding, it was a daily penance. Seeing Dale months later, happy with another woman, a calm I had never provided him, brought a pang of genuine regret. The illusion of my perfect life had shattered, revealing the true cost of chasing external validation. But in the quiet moments, volunteering at the community center, writing to Carol, watching a Midwestern sunset, I began to find a different kind of peace. It wasn't the peace of grand success, but the hard-won peace of self-awareness and genuine humility. I had paid the price, not just by losing everything, but by gaining a profound understanding of myself.